Thanks everybody for coming. It's a great turnout for the Lunch and Learn, the second day of the charrette. We are fortunate enough to have with us David Purcell, who is actually contracted with the town to do a separate study from the zoning comprehensive plan project that Code Studio is doing. David has been charged with a couple specific tasks. One is to update the economic data used to generate the town's comprehensive plan back in the early 2000s, which David actually worked on. So, which is an important point because he has continuity from the early 2000s to some subsequent studies from both the village and the town up to today. So he's updating the economic data. He's also specifically looking at the office market in the town. One of the recognized changes in the town's economy is how office use is fitting into the overall picture. This is a nationwide issue. Suburban office parks are challenged right now. The nature of them is changing, and the town is trying to get ahead of the curve and see how suburban office parks in the town, such as the Audubon Office Park, can possibly change over time. So it was kind of just good luck here. David was available to be here during the charrette week, and some of his economic prognostication will help with the Imagine Amherst project. So with that, we'll turn it over to David.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction, Gary, and thank you all for being here. No one's eating lunch, so I guess we'll just be learning. Oh wait, Ellery's eating lunch. The rest of us will have to go hungry here. So again, the body of work I'm presenting here, this is a sneak preview of it. The official presentation won't happen until at a later point to be determined with the town board and the IDA board. But the town of Amherst and the Amherst IDA came together to sponsor this economic study, which, as Gary said, is refreshing a similar piece of research that was done 15 years ago. A lot has changed in the last 15 years in Amherst. It's not the same picture economically locally, nor is it the same picture economically regionally. So I'm going to start with the region and what you have on the handout in front of you. If you don't have it, there are some more out there, so please, I think they're back there maybe. But anyway, this is the same thing as this, but it's up here in case you don't want to look down, and so people can look at it later. The big story in the region is that the Buffalo metro area, the regional economy, officially it's the Buffalo, Cheektowaga, Niagara Falls Metropolitan Statistical Area, say that 10 times fast. Erie and Niagara counties, basically.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're fine here.
Employment in the metro area has gone up by 23,000 jobs since bottoming out at the end of the recession in 2010. So, if you take a look at this graphic here, and I'm sorry it's so small, it makes more sense if you look at it up here, so I'll refer to it. The blue is everything that happened from 2001 to 2010. The green is everything that's happened since 2010. So you had job losses in the region, not just during the recession, but prior to the recession, particularly in manufacturing. In that 9-year stretch, the region lost about 28,000 manufacturing jobs. No surprise, you all live here, you all saw it happen, and it was devastating. It continued to drag the regional economy down. But if you ignore that and just look at the green part, every major employment sector in the Buffalo metro area has actually been growing since 2010 and on a sustained basis. This wasn't just 1 year up, 1 year down. It's been year after year of employment growth across the board. And in total, as I said, the region has added 23,000 jobs in the last 5 years, which has really improved the picture overall. And it's been in many different sectors. The top sector would be education and health services, the so-called eds and meds sector of the economy. A lot of that is driven by growth at the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus. A lot of it is driven by private universities and other private educational institutions, but it's a very prosperous part of the economy. Retail and hospitality has also been growing. These are not high-paying jobs necessarily. This is kind of a trailing indicator, though, that retail jobs, restaurant jobs, those get created when the higher-paying sectors are creating jobs. So if you have people earning more money, you have more money being brought into the region by manufacturers, by professional services firms. That drives the retail economy. So if you think gee, there are more stores here, there are more restaurants here than there used to be. You're not imagining it. There actually has been a boom over the last 5 years in the Buffalo area in that part of the economy. However, all of this is in the context of the longer range and still trying to overcome that. So, the region is not necessarily in a better place economically than it was 15 years ago, but it is unquestionably in a better place economically than it was 5 years ago. Sorry, should I close the door? No, we're good. Okay.
We're sending her back.
Okay, that's
It's
fine.
just a seating problem here.
We got it. So, but what's the fundamental difference though is between 15 years ago when I last studied the economy here, when the town of Amherst last took a comprehensive look at its economic picture, is the town of Amherst is not the go-to place in the region. It was an assumption, and a correct one 15 years ago, that when a professional services firm, an accounting firm, consulting, engineering, what have you, was looking for space in metropolitan Buffalo, this was the first place they would look. You look at the office parks around the town, and all of them were those destinations 15 years ago. The suburbs were the place to be, starting in the 80s through the 90s into the 2000s. That's where it was happening. There's been a generational shift, and this is, as Gary was alluding to, not by any means limited to Western New York. It's a national trend, and it's a growing national trend of young workers and small companies, startups, etc., don't want to be in the suburban office campus where you drive to an office building, get out of your car, walk into the building, work. If you want to go to lunch, you have to go back to your car and drive somewhere else. After work, you get in your car, you leave, and then that office park is vacant from 5 p.m. until 9 a.m. the next morning. That's not the model that's popular anymore. Young workers, corporations, etc., want to be in mixed-use urban environments. I'm sure you've all recognized that downtown Buffalo has been on the upswing the last 5 or so years. Part of it is the regional economy is growing, but more of it is that the regional economy is more oriented towards downtown now than it really has been any time in the last 50 years or more. You're seeing companies choosing to be downtown or in the neighborhoods around town, like the medical campus or Larkinville, and this is real. I talk to developers in my research, I talk to brokers, I talk to business owners. They're all saying our young workers want to be downtown. So when companies are looking to recruit and retain talent, they want to be downtown. They don't want to be in suburban office parks anymore. Now, this is not all doom and gloom, because when they say they want to be downtown, it's not because they want to specifically be in downtown Buffalo. It's because they want to be in an environment where people can leave the office and walk somewhere to get lunch. They want to go somewhere where they can walk somewhere to go to happy hour, where they can live nearby, where they don't have to live their lives in cars. The reason they're going downtown is because there's no alternative. There's nowhere else in Western New York that approximates what you get in downtown Buffalo. You go around the country, and I'll get back to this later, there are many examples of suburban areas that have built these town centers, these mini downtowns, these destinations where people can live, work, and play within a small area, or at least walk from one area to another, get on a bike and ride from one place to another, ride transit from one place to another and not have to do that. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Washington, D.C. area or have heard of a place called Reston Town Center. It's out by Dulles Airport. It was a 1960s planned community, very much like Audubon, although much larger. And it was originally designed around a series of low-density suburban shopping centers. People would get in their cars and drive to them. Beginning in the late 80s, early 90s, they built a downtown called Reston Town Center, which now is about a 16-block area of high-rises, of expensive shops, movie theaters, condominiums, apartments, etc. All of that happened intentionally. It was designed by the community to say, okay, we were this for our first 25 years, but we're not that anymore. Now it's a vibrant downtown that's been plunked in the middle of a planned suburban community. And it's worked because it has the density, it has the critical mass, and most importantly, it has the public spaces at the center of it where people can gather. It's more than just getting in your car and driving to another shopping center or driving to another office building. It's all self-contained in one place. Another point about the regional economy is that and then this is something I'll get to in a second on the strengths and weaknesses too, is that Amherst has something that no one else has, not just in this region, but anywhere in New York State, which is the University at Buffalo, the flagship campus of the SUNY system, over 30,000 students, research activities, hundreds of graduates every year in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, hundreds of graduates each year with business degrees, both undergraduate and MBAs. You have all this talent coming out of UB. While they're here, they're spending money here. I know there's a lot of friction sometimes in this community between the university and the neighborhoods around it, and that's understandable. That happens at a lot of universities. But the university has a major role in the economy here for the students while they're here, for opportunities for starting up and growing businesses after they graduate, for translating the research being done by the faculty at the university into jobs and long-term investment. And so that's something that's a really strong asset that, to be honest, right now it's being leveraged more in Buffalo around the medical campus with the investments being made there. And there just has not been this large-scale translation of what UB does into creating and sustaining jobs in Amherst. It does happen. There is a facility on campus that's an incubator that has successfully, led to the startup of many companies, but it's one building, and it's one fairly small building that the university has outgrown, and they are looking to do more, and they're looking to the town to do more to help them. So, getting a bit ahead of myself. That's the regional picture. In terms of how that translates to Amherst, the starting point was, well, where does Amherst excel, and where does Amherst need to do more work to improve? So if you look at the strengths and weaknesses part of this, I'll quickly run through that. Although the suburbs are not what they used to be in terms of what people want, if you look at the entire picture of the suburban office market and the suburban retail market around Western New York, Amherst is still the top suburban location. It's not just here that things are struggling, but if you compare Amherst to the other suburbs, to Orchard Park, to Tonawanda, to Cheektowaga, you're still in an enviable position here. You still have a large mass of office space, large masses of concentrations of retail development of various scales in all different parts of town, and it's still a place to be. I think one indicator of that is when you see popular businesses from Buffalo, when they want to start, when they want to expand to the suburbs and create their first suburban location. This is more likely than not where they're coming. Moorpat in Williamsville, the brew pub, being possibly the best example of that. They're a popular Buffalo brew pub. When they wanted to come to the suburbs, they came to Williamsville. So you still have that, although the suburbs don't have the allure that they did a generation ago, as far as suburban communities go in this region, you're still at the top of the list. Secondly, UB. As I talked about, it's a major driver of the economy. It's a major influence on the culture of the town. And you have both the North Campus and South Campus within the town of Amherst, and the kind of the axis between them, and a lot of energy in the southwestern part of the town that's built around those two campuses. Third is excellent quality of place assets. When I say that, it's all the things that make you want to live somewhere. The quality of the housing stock, the school district, the parks and recreation opportunities. You've got all that here. And when people get relocated to the area and they ask their realtors, okay, I just got moved here, I want to live here, I want to raise my children here, where should I go? More often than not, the answer is Amherst. This is a desirable place that people still want to be in. And I hear some people snickering, but that's what the real estate community still says. Housing. While the commercial market, office and retail, has struggled a bit, the housing market here has not struggled at all. There are some pockets of neighborhoods that don't do as well as others, but on the whole, home values are appreciating. There's been strong demand for all different types of housing, for apartments and rental housing. There's been several new projects in the town that have done extremely well. Townhouse development has become increasingly popular. There's great demand for senior housing, age restricted and otherwise, that serves a population of people in the town who may not want single-family homes anymore, who may be snowbirds and only here part of the year. And there's still very strong demand for housing. And as long as there's strong demand for housing, that will sustain other parts of the local economy. And then finally, the Main Street corridor, essentially starting at the 290 and going through the village all the way out to Young's Road. You have critical mass there that is getting, it's being reinforced by some of the developments that happen there. The Mosey development, for example, the new mixed-use development that's happening in the village at Main and Hirschfield. Those things are reinforcing the quality of the village. You have the shopping, you have the dining, you have the parks, the redevelopment in front of the water mill and creation of a better public space there has been a great addition to the village and something that reinforces the town as well. So you have that place, you have the potential to, keep developing along Main Street, keep reinforcing that sense of place you have there. That's all the good news. So I'm going to now hit on some of the challenges. Maybe I should have said challenges and not weaknesses, but these are things that frankly make it a little bit more difficult here than it would have been in the past. First and foremost is the absence of sites that can accommodate large-scale commercial development. All of the office parks you see here in town, not all of them, but most of them are pretty old at this point. Some of them were developed as early as the 1960s up through the last 10 or so years. There really aren't too many more places where you have the transportation access, where you have the utilities, where you have the zoning in place, where you can do that sort of campus-style development. And so there's a need to rethink how development is done simply because there just aren't too many places left to do that model of development. Secondly, on those existing office campuses, you have a lot of older buildings that have become obsolete for various reasons. The first reason being the environment, that you have a building in the middle of a parking lot that's out of favor in the marketplace and is likely to continue to be out of favor over the next generation. You have a lot of these older vacant buildings that are simply no longer desirable. A lot of these older buildings, too, are configured improperly. Their floor plates are too small for modern users. If it's an industrial building, the ceiling height may be too low, or the loading dock doors might not be tall enough to accommodate the movement of products in and out. There's a lot of that older product in the town that just cannot meet the needs of the market anymore. Next, and I'm going to start scratching on some uncomfortable things here. I talk to a lot of people in the business and real estate community, and there certainly can be a lot said by residents and homeowners in a community about developers and all sorts of adjectives used around real estate development. But there's a perception in the development community that the town is not as open and not as welcoming of investment and development as it used to be. And when that happens and the word gets around, real estate developers take their business elsewhere. I know to some people they'd say, good, let them take their business elsewhere. But this gets to another issue that I cover in my report, which is the taxable valuation of the town's properties. That over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a shift in what's happened in the town's valuation, that there's been much stronger growth in its residential valuation than its commercial valuation. The office properties, the growth rate has slowed. There's actually been a decline over the last 3 years in industrial property valuation. When that happens, when residential value is going up and non-residential value is going down, the property taxes of homeowners go up. And so that's something that happens. So it's a choice you make as a community. It's not one I'm going to tell you how to make. I'm just telling you what the facts say. What the facts say is that your residential property tax burden has been going up in recent years. And unless there's more investment in commercial and mixed-use development in the town, that's going to continue to happen.
Couldn't it be just because it's overbuilt? Commercial space is overbuilt.
Well, yes, there are many reasons why it's going down. The point is, it is going down. So there are different ways you can look at it. I don't have the answer for you about why it's happening, but the fact is, it is happening. Yes, ma'am.
Did they factor in the actual tax value that these businesses are contributing to the town?
This is a report by the town assessor. They pulled it directly from each year's assessment data. What is the total valuation of all residential property versus all other types of property? So it's whatever the assessor looks at. Taxable value, correct.
And what about the taxes they're paying without their abatements?
This does not look at abatements. This is just pure taxable value.
That's the problem. If you don't get any money back for this property, what's the sense of putting it up?
Well, this doesn't account for abatements. This accounts for just the pure value of the property according to the assessor. So this doesn't even include abatements. If I may move on, a couple more weaknesses. I talked about suburban land use patterns. The younger generation has stated very clearly all over the country, this is not what we want. We want urban life, we want walkability, we want mixed uses. And that's going to be a problem in Amherst because the entire town for the last 50 years has been developed at a lower density, car-oriented model. So that's worked for a long time, but there are signs that that model is not working anymore, and that in the future the town has to look at itself differently in order to continue to prosper. Another related issue is the strained transportation network that, I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, and I now live in Atlanta, so when I hear people here talk about traffic, I can, smile a little bit and say, you don't know what traffic is. However, the traffic has unquestionably gotten worse in the last 15 years. And there are more choke points. There are more areas of the town that are harder to get to. Getting east-west across town on Sheridan or Main Street at certain times of day, it's a major chore. And it's something that takes away from your quality of place. It takes away from people's perception of the place. And that's something that definitely has to be thought about as the town looks at economic growth and development. Before I get to the forecasts and what I foresee happening over the next 25 years, I want to talk a little bit more about national trends. As part of my research, I took a look at some best practices in what other older suburban communities around the country are doing to rethink themselves, either at a town-wide or jurisdiction-wide scale or for specific properties. So I took a look, and when my report comes out in a few weeks, you'll be able to see this at 7 different examples from around the country of communities or specific developments that have attempted to increase density and mixed uses, create these central places in a suburban context. And from that review, these points I've got here kind of hit on some recurring themes in them. The first one being, as I mentioned, this is a national phenomenon. Suburban office parks are struggling everywhere. Obsolete office space is a problem all over the country. There's one academic researcher that estimated that about 60 million square feet of older office, retail, and industrial space across the country is going to have to be redeveloped over the next 20 years. So, let that sink in for a minute. 60 million square feet of space that is no longer useful and has to be reimagined as something else. In order to do this, though, some of the common threads in that, number one is that you have to have a vision. You cannot go into this process of rethinking large office parks, business parks, hundreds of acres of property. Now I'd like to close the door. Yeah, Lee's got it. You can't go into this process saying, well, we'll just do this building here and that building there. You really need a vision because it's a long-term commitment, 10, 20 years. And you need someone to say, whether it's the town, whether it's a private development, whether it's the university, whether it's all three together. Public-private partnerships are a big part of this, as I'll get back to. But someone has to have a vision. Someone has to have a plan. Someone has to say, this is what we're going to be committed to for a long time in order to become something else. As part of that vision, public spaces are critical. You have to have gathering spots. It's not enough to just have an office building or a shopping mall. You need to have kind of all of it come together with public spaces where people can gather, where people can hang out. Linkages to trail systems and other ways to get around besides driving have made some of these projects much more successful, where you can get on your bike and ride somewhere or walk somewhere. So that's been something that's been recurring in all the case studies, is that public space element and public access element to it. On that note, it was striking to find that public transit, whether rail or bus, is not essential. A lot of people were saying just add transit, that fixes everything. It adds value. Certainly areas around transit stations nationally are more popular than areas not around transit. However, in a suburban context, if you can create good development with good public spaces, it's okay if you get in your car and leave when you're done. and that has worked in a lot of places. The magic of it is, and it's not really magic because it's how cities used to work until 50 years ago, is that once you're there, you can do different things while you're there and stay longer, not have to get in your car and drive everywhere. So as long as you can get people to have a good experience once they arrive, you don't have to get them there on a bus or on a train in the first place. And the last point, which I alluded to, is you're dealing with huge projects that require long-term commitments, and the involvement of the public sector is almost always necessary. The numbers just don't add up to buy an old office building, knock it down, and build something else unless someone is assisting with assembling sites or paying for the development of streets and sidewalks and other infrastructure, unless someone is helping to defray the risk that the public sector is taking on in order to achieve the vision. It makes it that much harder. You're very fortunate, because not many communities in Western New York are, to have your own industrial development agency. And you have David Menjoya from the IDA here who can talk to that.
Vice Chairman's here.
Oh, good. The fact that you have that is a great asset to the town, that you have a local agency that has the ability to be in partnership with the private sector, with other institutions out there as well, potentially, to execute these sorts of projects. If you didn't have that, you'd have to go through the county IDA, which, I'm not going to editorialize on it, but I think it's obvious from the projects they're involved in. They are emphasizing development in the city of Buffalo and not so much in the suburbs. So that is a leg up that the town has. So without further ado, I will now get into what the future looks like in Amherst. And then I'll take more questions, and hopefully we can have some dialogue amongst all of you and not just talking up to me. So the forecasts that I put together start with the baseline forecast that the town and the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council have put together through 2040. Based on that forecast, the town anticipates adding about 9,000 jobs and about 4.2 million square feet of commercial space between 2015 and 2040. So what I did was start with that set of forecasts and then take a look at it in two different ways. The second scenario, which is called more development around UB North Campus, is just that. It's saying that similar amount of employment growth, similar amount of commercial space added, but we're going to focus the development efforts in planning analysis area number 3, which is this part of the town around the university, and really emphasize engaging with the university, creating more opportunities for office and retail development on the edges of the campus, or perhaps even on the campus in partnership with the university. And then the third scenario looks at a little bit more aggressive growth. So about 16,500 jobs would be added to the town under this scenario, which would create about 6 million additional square feet of commercial development. You see the right-hand column on this table, the amount of land needed to do this. When I worked on this exercise 15 years ago, those numbers on future land were much bigger. The reason why is because the assumption at the time was that almost all of the new development would occur in business campus settings, that you'd be developing new business parks, you'd be putting up office, industrial buildings, etc., on land that was currently undeveloped. So you're talking about needing 400, 500 or more acres over the next 20 years at that point. Now it's different, especially in the southern part of the town, planning analysis areas 5 and 6. There isn't much land left to do anything on. Everything that's going to happen in those areas is going to require redeveloping or repurposing old buildings or old business parks or old shopping centers in some cases, as the Imagine Amherst effort is focusing on. That's where the energy is going to be in the town, is on redevelopment, simply because, as I pointed out before, there just aren't very many sites for new development left, especially in the closer in to the city parts of Amherst. So with that in mind, I'll just quickly run through what is envisioned for each of the 6 PAAs, planning analysis areas, based on the forecasts. So we'll start up north here. PAA 1 is Northwest Amherst, basically everything north of the 990 and Tonawanda Creek. I'm sorry, not Tonawanda Creek. Which is that? Ellicott Creek?
Ellicott.
Thank you. Essentially, there isn't going to be much development of non-residential space in that area because it's far removed from the center of town. other than the couple of interchanges off of the 990, it's really hard to access this part of town. And the opportunities in this area will be focused on the redevelopment of some of the older industrial properties in the Audubon Industrial Park. You have a lot of old, obsolete buildings that simply cannot function anymore in their present form. So there's going to be a need and an opportunity to rethink what to do with some of that. In PA number 2, the northeast part of town, what you're looking at is a modest amount of new development, and almost all of it will be focused at the Cross Point Business Park, which is right about here. That's where Geico has gone in, and there's been some other new developments, and there's still room left for development in that park. There's going to be more emphasis there, but overall, I don't see much growth in that part of town simply because of where it's located, and with the exception of a couple of areas with interchanges off of the 990, it's really going to be harder to access for any businesses that might want to locate up there. Area number 3 is the one with the most variability to it because it really depends on how engaged the town and the university are, to be blunt. And I know that's been an issue in the past, is that the university and the town have had strained relationships, that there's been some conflicts over particularly where students live and what students do on weekends, if you might say that. But that's just the kind of thing you see in college communities everywhere. Nevertheless, you also see strong partnerships between local governments and college communities where they do come together for mutual benefit. So there's a real opportunity for the town, for the IDA, for the university to come together and invest in office and retail development in particular, and also in housing, not just student housing, but housing for faculty, housing for recent graduates who might be working in some of these office or retail developments. You can see pretty easily some of the properties in the Audubon Business Park up here just north of campus becoming a mixed-use development, taking some of those vacant office sites and creating places that you can do office, retail, housing, all in close relationships to one another in close proximity to the North Campus. Area number 4 over here, it's presently mostly a residential area, and that's what I would foresee it staying mostly a residential area. You have a lot of stable single-family neighborhoods, some older shopping centers, some of which might be ripe for redevelopment, particularly the Gettsville area. But for the most part, it's a more stable part of town that you would not expect to see an awful lot of change over the next 25 years, probably less than in any other part of town. Now we get to the interesting part, area number 5, which is essentially everything inside of the 290 plus a little bit of the Main and Union corridors. So this is at present the oldest part of the town, the commercial heart of the town, and there's going to be a lot of activity in this area. You have a lot of demand for redevelopment of some of the older commercial areas. The Niagara Falls Boulevard corridor has a lot of older retail centers. One of the sites being looked at in Imagine Amherst is Northtown Plaza. A lot of development potential on that site and on other sites like it in that part of town. And based on what people want, what the rising generation of millennials want, this is the part of town that makes the most sense to do higher density development. You have the infrastructure there. It's the area between the 2 university campuses. You have lots of older commercial and office properties that can accommodate more development than they currently do. So I would expect to see a lot of energy in that part of town. Finally is area number 6, which is the village of Williamsville, and then the areas around it, including the southern part of the Transit Road Corridor, which is also one of the sites being looked at. There's a fair amount of retail and office demand, but there's also some continued light industrial demand. The Worley Drive corridor is already a major industrial center in the region. Its proximity to the airport and to the thruway is very valuable, and you already see some kind of industrial but not really uses going in there, such as a brewery. There's an opportunity for more of that type of thing. So we're not talking about heavy smokestack manufacturing industries, but rather smaller manufacturers and producers that are making new and interesting products that you may not have seen here before. This is exactly the kind of location they want to be in. Add to that the fact that it's in such close proximity to your de facto downtown in the village of Williamsville, and you have a lot of opportunities for many different types of commercial and industrial growth in that part of town. So we're about at 12:35, which is good. That's what I was planning on. So at this point, I think I will stop talking and sit down, and hopefully you'll all engage with not just me, but with each other about what this all means, and what you think about how this relates to the broader discussion of what you do with some of the older commercial parts of the town. Please.
I'm just wondering, the property at Sheridan, the old, what do you call it, the
Northtown Plaza, yeah.
Now that obviously is a perfect place for what you're talking about. But what other places in that area do you see as a possibility with that kind of amount of space?
In that part of town?
Well, you're looking at the gun club, you're looking at the Westwood, what are you thinking of?
Well, I'm specifically talking about the existing retail and office centers. The Ridgely Corporate Park, for example, which is kind of tucked away off of Bailey.
Uh-huh.
It's got a whole bunch of small office buildings, many of which are vacant.
So you're only dealing with existing, you're not even talking about possible, in other words, the sites that have been built on.
The assumption I've made in my forecast is about 75 to 90% of development in the southwest part of town is going to be the redevelopment of existing buildings. So that'll include, again, Northtown, the Ridgely Park. Boulevard Mall is for sale right now, and there's a possibility that it might look very different 5 to 10 years from now. There's a lot of parking around that mall.
And just one more question. I'm not as knowledgeable in this as everybody else here is, but I live in the northwest Amherst area. Mm-hmm. And when you say there's no need for anything, that place is just packed with senior housing, student housing, like cities. I mean, little student senior house cities. Anything that's residential in that area has been gradually kind of squeezed out. Now, is that possibly part of the plan that some of these neighborhoods are going to be obsolete? Let's just get rid of these houses. They get bum down the street. They used to have a whole street of them. This one gets knocked down, gets sold to Tim Hortons. This one gets down. You know what I'm saying? We see a trend that's kind of scary for homeowners.
I want to be clear. This is not a plan that I'm doing. This is an economic research piece that will then be used to inform future thinking about the town's comprehensive plan. What I'm saying is, based on the market, there's not going to be large-scale demand for office or major regional retail in that area. What you're talking about is neighborhood-scale retail that supports the people who live in that area. There will be demand for that anywhere that there's housing growth, but I was not forecasting housing growth in this plan, or rather in this study. Okay. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sources of your information, like which...
Yeah. So the forecasts I put together, as I said, started with the regional forecasts that are used by the Greater Buffalo Niagara Regional Transportation Council. That's the official metropolitan planning organization that does transportation planning for the region. They work with all of the jurisdictions in area Niagara counties to forecast future housing and employment growth at a very fine-grained level. It's called something called a traffic analysis zone, or a TAZ. And there are, about 60 or 70 TAZs in the town, Rick, is that right? Okay, but a lot. So basically, they chop the town up into, let's say,
roughly the equivalent census tract.
Yeah, so at least 40 little areas within the town. They say in this area, this area, this area, we expect this many people to live there in 2040 versus now this many people to work here. And they divide that up further into 4 different employment categories: office, retail, industrial, and wholesale. So it's very finely grained. I then aggregated that to match up with these 6 planning areas that the town uses. I then adjusted it based on a couple of sources in outside forecasts: the Census Bureau, the New York State Department of Labor, a third-party forecaster called Economic Modeling Systems. So I ran it through the ringer, and when my report's out, that'll all be in the appendix, and adjusted it based on these other forecasts to make sure that it makes sense in terms of what other people are thinking about the region. I hope that didn't confuse you further. Okay, thank you. Yes?
One more question.
Sure, ask away.
It's a dumb question. How is this going to affect zoning? Is this going to be changing the zoning? Is this what it's really all about? All over the town, or just in these areas?
So I get that one.
Yes.
Because Lee Einsweiler, the head of the Imagine Amherst project, So David's study is a parallel study the town's doing at the same time. We've taken advantage of having him here so that you could hear him at the same time you're hearing about the land use and the zoning. Yes, our study is looking at all 57 centers in the town, and we are proposing to replace the zoning for all of those centers, because currently you use pretty much one flavor of zoning for all these kinds of places all over the town. And because of that, you sort of twist it and tweak it and vary it and whatever to try to fit it in each of those places. You need more flavors of zoning to more accurately depict these kinds of centers. And so yes, we are replacing the zoning throughout the town.
But not adding to the commercial districts.
But
What Lee's study is focusing on is those 57 centers that are, as they're presently defined, rethinking how they're thought about. And if anything, the actual amount of land among those dedicated to just commercial use is likely to get smaller, because the discussions that you're participating in are talking about, the kinds of uses that you could see here other than just retail, which can include housing.
And that means that if there's any major issue with surrounding residential areas, they will have no say in it.
That's not true at all.
So changing the zoning, first and foremost, is a process that we're engaging the public with and talking about them now. We're using 6 different test sites to try to figure out what physically fits on them, what could be built there in the future if they were available to a developer, so that we have a realistic sense of what could be built on those properties. So for example, there is no reason to talk about 6 stories in Snyder, because there's not enough land area on any of those sites to build 6 stories, right?
And yet they
So-
They did find
And
one.
yet our town did. That's where we're at.
Well, you're
There's a
calling
trust factor
what
here,
I'm
and it
calling
isn't
west of
existing.
Village Snyder, and yes, the trust factor is broken. I'll agree with you. But so we are testing zoning on real sites in 6 places throughout the town to see what we might be able to create. And that's what we're doing during the course of this week.
But you've got those sites in your vision and in your planning. Now, when those sites get looked at, when that zoning's been put on place on all of those places, then the neighborhoods, at that point, they've lost any control.
Well, so if you're suggesting that your only control comes through the rezoning process
Well, that's where
today,
the building gets to be put up.
no, the rezoning is kind of getting the site ready for a building. You can be involved in the site plan review process, for example. And that is on a case-by-case basis on individual buildings. So
I
we're
think
glad
in
to,
Amherst, you're wearing rose-colored glasses. That's not what happens.
that is correct under the current system. So we'll continue that conversation. Today's conversation is, for this portion, only about the economics, but I am glad to continue that conversation. Because it's right on point.
I want to be clear here that the purpose of this discussion we're having right now is to let you all know the greater market forces that are shaping this. I know what property you're talking about because I slept there last night. Okay.
How dare you?
I saw
I was not looking out my window. I was
saw
working.
that.
Okay, if I
But they
may.
saw you.
Okay, if I may. That project is built, but that project didn't just get built in a vacuum. It got built. Ma'am, I'm trying to explain the situation. Okay.
It's frustrating for us.
I imagine that it must be, but it's frustrating for me as well when I'm trying to explain that this is not happening in a vacuum. There's demand in the region for new hotel rooms. You have a supply of old, outdated hotel rooms around the North Towns, and the new hotel developments that are coming in here, not just the Hyatt Place, but the Wyndham Garden, some of the reinvestments happening along Transit Road. It's a response to a market niche where the development community and may I please finish? That the development community is seeing a market opportunity and saying, we see demand, we see potential in this market, and they're succeeding. Those new hotel properties are performing well. They're sustaining jobs in the community and adding tax base. I get what you're saying. I'm a homeowner myself. That's a separate discussion. What I'm telling you is there's a real estate market out there that sees opportunities in the town of Amherst for hotel development, for office development, for retail, for multifamily housing. That demand is real. That demand is going to be here. And from my perspective, the town has to confront this you have to say, we understand this demand is here. We understand people want to develop in the town of Amherst and invest in the town of Amherst. Now, we as the citizens have to make sure that that development happens in a way that's in concert with what we want our community to be. We want to make sure that it's something we actually want, that is a good balance between helping the town prosper and helping the community prosper. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. I will never accept as a planner and an economist that it's yes or no, black or white, somebody wins, somebody loses. I refuse to accept that
Well, that's what I'm
notion.
trying to say. That building, okay, fine, but what it did, it so greatly impacted the neighborhood behind it that they lost taxes.
So the zoning should make sure that that kind of project is not possible again. And it can. So we'll talk about that some more, about the
Okay, I'm
kinds
sorry.
of
Okay,
tools
well,
we
this
could
one.
use.
Well, I have a broader question.
Yes.
Why is it, and maybe this is again, like Alex said, maybe a stupid question, but it gets down to the basics. How is this new vision going to be better than the way zoning has been done thus far? What is the essence of why exactly do we need this, and how will this new vision help us? What are the benefits?
So we could kind of talk about it building by building. Let's take the Mosey as the first example, and we'll get to the Hyatt.
But I have to interrupt you. Aren't we getting off the topic? Isn't the topic economic?
Yeah.
I would say we are,
Yeah.
yes. I
I
mean,
mean, zoning is not what this is about.
He was invited here in support of our project, so I'll take just a moment and finish, and then we'll have the conversation afterwards. So the Mosey as an example, from an urban design perspective, 6 stories of a flat building at the edge of a street that's called a village main street might not have been the right physical form. It's not that the total square footage for the site is too much, it's not that the use is wrong, it's not that the structured parking is a bad idea, but the urban form is wrong, and the new zoning could reset that urban form. As many people know about the Hyatt site, the location of the Hyatt on that site is the biggest problem. If the Hyatt had stayed away from the surrounding residential areas, people would be much happier. They might still not be completely happy, of course, if there were 6 stories on that site. But if that had been located elsewhere on the site, it would have made a big difference. So this is an opportunity in looking at the zoning to rethink those questions, both about total height and about where that height goes on the site. And so that is something worth staying engaged in the conversation.
I would add to it that, and the reason I keep beating on this point about what the market wants, the water trying to find its level, is you have a lot of, I think anyone in this room will agree, whether or not you support, support new development or oppose to new development, that you have a lot of older retail and office and industrial space in Amherst that is no longer creating much value to the town or adding to its tax base. Can we all agree with that premise? You have a lot of old, obsolete commercial structures in the town. Some people disagree. Do you disagree with that assertion?
No, you're right, I agree.
Okay, all right. In order for that to change, the zoning has to change. Now, the zoning can change and make it all single-family housing. That is possible. It's a strategy I've seen other communities use where they've downzoned commercial properties and said this is now residential property. If that's a choice the town wants to make through this process, through its comprehensive planning process, that's a choice you're able to make. But if the town wants to make a choice and say, well, we need to balance residential and commercial, we need to have non-residential tax base, we need to have employment opportunities in the town, then you have to think about it differently. You're not going to flatten an old office building or an old shopping center and replace it with another 1 or 2 story office building or shopping center because the economics of that don't work. The developer who would do that sort of project would lose money. And most developers I know don't like losing money. So the choice you have to make is you either let things continue to decline, number one. Number two, you convert it entirely to a different use that is totally non-commercial. Or number three, you have to be willing to think about things differently. As Lee said, I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, and I would agree with what you said, that the primary objection to the Hyatt was not the fact that a hotel was built there, because there always has been a hotel on that site. The objection to it was the size, the scale, and the placement of the building on the site. And through a better zoning process and a more predictable zoning process, which is what Lee is trying to create here, working with the town staff, that sort of instance can be avoided in the future.